Tomorrow, President Biden will hold a high-stakes call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. intelligence has warned of a Russian troop buildup along the Ukrainian border. A report obtained by CBS News says Moscow is mobilizing up to 175,000 troops that could invade Ukraine as soon as next month. But Russian officials say they're not planning to cross the border. Ed O'Keefe joins me now with the very latest developments at the White House on this very topic. Ed, the president is reportedly heading into the call with President Putin with bipartisan support. A rare magical thing these days. What are you hearing from lawmakers?
Yeah, a few other issues unite the two parties like Russia does these days. There's a big concern, obviously, for what they may be planning there along the eastern border of Ukraine in the Donbass region. And you saw over the weekend Democratic and Republican lawmakers both saying that the president needs to talk tough to Putin, try to stop him from taking military action. They are supporting him so far. Let's see if that support holds in the details. If, and that's still a big if, the Russians do in fact invade Ukraine in the coming days or weeks. But there has been, of course, concern about Russia's actions on a series of issues and on multiple fronts over the course of this year. The president, the White House over the weekend confirming he will speak with the Russian leader virtually tomorrow morning. They are expected to cover a wide range of issues, including cybersecurity, strategic issues there in the region, and then, of course, what may or may not be underway in terms of planning for a possible invasion of Ukraine. Remember, the last time this happened was back in 2014 when they took part of Crimea, and the saber-rattling has continued ever since by Russia as they try to maintain their influence over that part of the world.
So, here's the thing. We heard from the president some tough talk, but very vague tough talk. I don't know what exactly is in his toolbox, but I presume that sanctions could be one of the threats he's able to wield. But the thing about sanctions is thus far they haven't worked all that well with Russia. Do you know if the U.S. is looking at sanctions, additional sanctions?
The president was asked about this in recent days. The defense secretary was asked in recent days, what exactly could you do to respond? They were vague, as you said, and not necessarily detailing what potentially could happen. Sanctions is one thing. Potential military advisors being sent to Ukraine is another possibility, that we would send more military equipment. For example, some things that we're trying to offload from the military operations in Afghanistan that we have nowhere else to send. But beyond that, perhaps the only other option really would be direct U.S. military engagement, and that's the kind of intensification that nobody wants to see, and would only be prompted by some significant kind of military action by Russia itself, and probably done in coordination with other allies, probably NATO. Even though Ukraine isn't a member of NATO, it's been trying to become one for several years. It is closely aligned with the group, but NATO has been reluctant to fully admit them for fear of ticking off the Russians. We'll see in the coming days whether or not this is something that warrants more direct action. But the fact that they're talking, the fact that the Secretary of State was meeting with the Russian foreign minister last week as well, suggests that diplomatic engagement continues and that there may be a way to resolve this without any weapons being fired.
Okay, I want to talk to you about another country in which, America has been doing kind of a delicate dance, talking about China. The Beijing Olympics are coming up. I presume the president is not going, but what can you tell us about how the administration is handling the Beijing Olympics amid accusations of China's human rights abuses?
Right. Well, so last month, CBS News learned that there were talks about a possible diplomatic boycott of the Olympics, meaning that a high-level U.S. government delegation would not be sent to the opening or closing ceremony, as is the tradition depending on where the Olympics are being held. We're now told that that decision could be formally announced this week. It would mean that U.S. athletes would still be able to participate in the games as scheduled. They would go with some level of U.S. diplomatic security, as is, again, the custom. U.S. Diplomatic security usually travels with the athletes for obvious reasons, no matter where they're competing in the world. But beyond them, there wouldn't be any high-level government official there representing the U.S. It may be that China ultimately signals, well, we're not really inviting world leaders and diplomatic envoys to this event anyway because of COVID-19. Although we have heard in reports recently the Russian President Putin himself has said he's planning to attend. It's easier for him to do that given that he's a Chinese neighbor. But we'll see whether and how the U.S. describes this diplomatic boycott later this week, should it come as expected. And what other kind of pressure that might put on, say, corporate sponsors of the games to either curtail their activities or at least try to signal that they disagree with China's record. Also should point out, as Congress continues debating the annual defense policy bill, there is likely to be some language in there that really infuriates the Chinese regarding its treatment of Uyghur Muslims, for example, and other labor issues in that country. So there are going to be all sorts of ways in which the Chinese in the coming days are likely to be officially upset with U.S. action and policy.
Back here in the U.S., we have a number of domestic issues that need to be tackled. The national debt ceiling, the president's social spending package. I know he would like to see something passed before Christmas. The National Defense Authorization Act. What is the Biden administration doing to advance these discussions?
They're keeping in touch with Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Schumer to see when exactly those things will proceed. It's likely this week is going to be dominated primarily, again, by that defense policy bill. This is a big must-pass piece of legislation that sets policy for what exactly the Pentagon is supposed to do. There will probably be a handful of up or down amendment votes on controversial issues relating to China, the situation that unfolded earlier this year in Afghanistan, maybe some other social policy issues related to the Pentagon regarding transgender troops and whatnot. Those are the kinds of tricks that get played in a bill that otherwise usually passes with overwhelming bipartisan support. So that may get off the table this week. The debt ceiling, depending on who you talk to, the Treasury Secretary suggests that things will run out, or the government will run out of its borrowing authority by next week. So check to see whether or not the Senate and the House can move quickly on some kind of an agreement there. And then Build Back Better. That is the big presidential priority, and getting it done by Christmas remains the goal of Democratic leaders. Whether or not that's possible depends on how quickly the White House and those Democratic leaders can convince moderate senators like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to get on board, get it passed, and get it to the president's desk.
All right, before we let you go, this ongoing spat between Congresswoman Omar and Boebert continues. Representative Ilhan Omar says that she's confident that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is going to be taking action this week against Representative Lauren Boebert for her anti-Muslim remarks against Omar last month. What are you hearing? What can we expect here?
Well, there is conversation among dozens of the most liberal members of the House caucus about trying to come up with some way to hold Congresswoman Boebert accountable for what she did or what she said in this case. Remember, there have been other steps taken against other members this year where they got stripped of their committee assignments or they were formally censured by the House. Given that it's been done already twice to other members for other reasons, why wouldn't they do it to her, is the argument that these liberal Democrats have been making. Of course, the real potential threat here is that it's establishing a precedent that when the shoe is on the other foot, let's say a little more than a year from now, if Republicans take control of the House, will they start to hold Democratic minority members in the Democratic minority, that is, in the House, accountable for something they did or said? The tit for tat essentially could bleed into the next congressional cycle. So there is that potential risk, and it may be that they calculate in the coming days it's not worth continuing to do this to individual members because it's only going to continue to poison the well there over in the House, which is particularly caustic this year. But either way, it looks as if there will be probably some sense by the end of this week of whether House Democrats want to take any formal action against her.
All right. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much.
Take care.